see you guys in the dark.
This story takes place 10 years ago when I was 16, and for almost that long I've wanted to tell it. I'm 25 now, and a female, I should note. It surely won't be as terrifying as the best on here, but I think it's a contender. It's played on my mind ever since it happened, if that's anything to go by. I guess we'll see. When I was in high school, I babysat on the odd occasion for a family I'd known since I was pretty young. They were great, really laid back, and it was the easiest babysitting job in the world because the kids would usually be in bed before I got there and always slept really well. It had been about a year since I'd babysat for them, and in that time they'd had a new baby who was about 6 months old. So on this occasion, it was me, three kids downstairs, and one baby sleeping upstairs. I should really mention before anything that their house was completely amazing. It wasn't the flashiest, but it was huge. And although it was in a suburban street, it was positioned on a hill. So from the master bedroom upstairs, you could look out over the whole city. They had tons of CDS, which back then was really exciting for me. The kitchen was always full, and the whole place was decorated like a gallery. Amazing art, brilliantly designed and really spacious, that sort of thing. They always had interesting stuff around, too. That night I noticed in the front room, amongst the kids' stuff, there was a fake samurai sword. I remember laughing at it, thinking it looked too real to be a toy, and waving it around a bit. It didn't surprise me. They were interesting people, and I was always finding things I liked. The layout of the house was cool, too. The front door opened almost directly into the living room, and off to the side we had the two kids' bedrooms, and then a staircase leading to upstairs to the parents' bedroom. The living room was fantastic, with giant windows overlooking the front garden and almost the entire street. The middle part of the house was completely open plan, with the kitchen and dining room spread out for what seemed like miles. Near the back of the house, they even had a small study, which was more like a reading nook. From memory, it was just an armchair and two walls of books. That part is important because the night this happened, that's where I was hanging out. I'd been dropped off by my parents around 8:30, and the mom and dad left soon after, telling me the kids were fast asleep, and that if I had any problems with the baby, I could wake their eldest daughter, who was good at settling him and would help me if I needed it. I remember being comforted by that because I knew virtually nothing about babies. I didn't need to, in the end, because the kids slept fine. But the important thing is, I felt safe, at ease. They told me they would be back around 1 a.m. and to call if I needed anything. I wasn't worried. I'd done this countless times before, and even though it was a cold night with a harsh wind, I knew this house. I knew the kids would sleep. I knew nothing would happen. I felt completely at home. I felt so safe, actually, that when I had trouble locking the screen door after they'd gone, I didn't stress too much about it. I thought maybe it was jammed or something. I didn't have a key to the front door, and usually the screen door shut just fine. They lived in a good neighborhood, though, and it didn't occur to me at the time that it was anything to worry about. I quickly forgot about it and went to the study to read after quickly peeking in on the kids. I lost track of time for a while. I didn't have a mobile phone when I was 16, and there was no clock in the reading nook. I was totally lost in a book, and before I knew it, a couple of hours had gone by. But it wasn't realizing the time that woke me from my reading stupor. It was nothing at all, and that's what was so frightening. I'd been deep in the book, and then all of a sudden looked up and felt such a sense of dread. Suddenly, everything seemed more quiet. Then I heard the wind, and unease and fear washed over me, so much so that I felt reluctant to move. I didn't understand. I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. I thought, as I stared at the books on the walls, that maybe I'd just been sitting too long. So I got up and slowly wandered into the kitchen with the intent of checking on the kids and then maybe watching some TV. The front living room was in darkness, and as I stepped into it on my way to the bedrooms, something stopped me dead in my tracks. With the light of the kitchen illuminating me from behind, I stood frozen, paralyzed by the sight of a man standing in the front garden. He didn't move, and I didn't either. I could see that he had shut the garden gate behind him, and from his position in the garden, it was clear he'd been walking towards the front door that was unlocked. I didn't know what to do. A million thoughts overwhelmed me. I had no weapon, the door was open, I couldn't get to the kids downstairs and the baby upstairs at the same time. He was huge and I was small. I was lit and he was in darkness. Dressed all in black, I've never seen anything more terrifying in my life. I knew if I didn't do something, he would come inside, and get us. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted the fake samurai sword, and very slowly, Bending down slightly but not taking my eyes off the figure in the garden, I picked it up and raised it in the air above my head. I don't know why, but I couldn't think of anything else. And after what seemed like an eternity, he turned and slowly walked towards the gate, opened it, and walked away down the street. It was only then I saw the glint of something at his side, something he'd hidden in one hand as he'd stood staring into the house. I stood there for a long time, watching him walk away. And then I ran to the front door and leaned against it, forcing it shut against an intruder that was no longer there. I was 16 and I was stupid. I never called anyone. I stayed that way until the parents got home, and I never told them what happened. I never told anyone for a long time. I thought everyone would blame me for putting the kids in danger, and then I convinced myself that it was nothing and maybe I just overreacted. The family today are fine and well, and nothing ever happened to them or their house after that night. But I have always been thankful that for moment of intense dread that caused me to leave the study, because if I hadn't, I don't even let myself think of how differently that night would have gone. So, man in the garden, I hope the fake sword was enough to scare you away from lurking outside people's houses in the night. I grew up in a really safe city in the Midwest, in an even safer neighborhood, sort of set back in the woods and separated from the main part of town. I haven't had a lot of creepy encounters in my short life, knock on wood, so this is pretty much the most afraid I've ever been. I was 11 at the time and had just passed a CPR/slash babysitting essentials course at the rec. My neighborhood was very close knit. All of the kids on my street played together, and because of my two younger brothers, I would soon become the automatic babysitter for the three families we lived closest to. I'd looked after my brothers for short amounts of time, but this was my first job as a real babysitter. Watching the two grade school age children who lived across the street, they were family friends. The parents had promised they'd be home by 11 p.m., and I knew that my parents were home and ready to step in if I needed anything, so I was a little nervous but felt like I had things under control. The kids were a novice babysitter's dream. They'd been trained that they are only allowed to choose one treat each before bed, and actually refused my offer to let them finish the show we were watching because it was their bedtime, and they still needed to brush their teeth first. I was floored, but it made my job super easy, so I tucked them in and headed back downstairs to watch TV until their parents returned. The mom is an interior designer, so their house is spacious and absolutely beautiful. Their living room is at the back of the house, with floor-to-ceiling windows and great views of the woods in their backyard. The couch is set up with its back to those windows, and I was watching TV with their elderly white lab, Alex. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something large and light-colored brush past the window behind me. I thought it might just be a deer, but I was 11 and alone, and I have an active imagination, so I began to feel uneasy and pretty on edge. The parents weren't due back for another 2 hours, so I walked into the kitchen to call my mom and dad for reassurance. Alex followed. Their kitchen faces the living room, with the house phone on the counter. This was before cell phones happened. Standing at the counter dialing my parents, I had a clear view through the broad archway into the living room and out those enormous windows into the backyard. Alex laid down at my feet as I stood next to the counter and told my mom that I thought I'd seen something out the window. Hearing her voice was as comforting and reassuring as I thought it would be, so I told her that, no, I didn't need Dad to come over, and that yes, I'd call her if I needed anything at all. I hung up the phone and sat down on the floor to rub Alex's ears and belly for a few minutes, still kind of wary of the living room. I hadn't been there too long before I caught a glimpse of something odd outside those giant windows. I looked harder, past the glare of the TV, and noticed a tiny light bobbing around in the woods. Probably just a neighbor, I thought. But as I watched, the light seemed to be moving in what was undeniably my direction. My whole body froze, and I stared as the light got closer and closer to the living room windows, and at some point I realized with complete and paralyzing horror that the light had grown large enough that the source had to be right outside the house. The beam swung from one side of the living room to the other and then settled directly on my face. I don't even think I squinted in the bright light as it shone through the window into my eyes. I was too startled. Alex snoozed on, placid in his old age and entirely unaware that my heart had pretty much stopped beating. The light moved again, this time swinging away to illuminate a face from underneath. I saw dark, hollow eye sockets and the glowing curves of someone's cheeks, but the face's details were lost in the harsh angle of the flashlight's beam. At this point, I was trying with all my might to scream, or to move my fingers enough to dial 911, or to move out of view of the window. Literally anything would have been better than sitting there with my mouth open and tears in my eyes like a stuffed turkey. But I'd never felt this kind of icy terror before and was completely immobilized by it. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, and I was totally powerless. The light swung around to point at me, then quickly moved back underneath the horrible face outside. It repeated this pattern once or twice, and then it suddenly disappeared. The flashlight had been turned off, and for whatever reason, that was enough to finally let me move again. I quickly stood and hit dial, about to call 911, as I mentally debated whether to hole up in the master bedroom with the children or just grab them and try to run out the front door to my parents' house. The rec class had not prepared me for this. Before I even got as far as the foyer and the first one, though, I heard a loud boom and felt my gut leap into my throat as I realized that I'd remembered close the main garage doors and lock the door from the garage to the laundry room, but couldn't remember locking the man door from the garage to their backyard. I almost dropped the phone as someone began pounding on the interior door. Through the pounding, though, I could hear a voice, a really, really fucking familiar voice. Mav 49, Mav 49, it's Dad. Let me in. I stumbled over, completely numb, and unlocked the door. My dad could hardly stand up. He was laughing so hard. Apparently, my mom had sent him over anyway to check on me and make sure there was nothing to be afraid of. He'd done a quick sweep of the woods and backyard with a flashlight, under the assumption that Mom had mentioned he'd be coming over. He saw me through the window and attempted to show me it was him by pointing at me and then shining the light on his face, under his freaking face. He was unaware that the shadows made it impossible to tell who he was, until he saw the color drain from my face and realized he'd just given me the scare of my life. He thought it was pretty funny. I didn't really agree. When I was a kid, probably about 10, my neighbor 3 houses down was a police officer. Pretty nice guy. He was divorced and his ex-wife lived a few hours away. That summer, both of his kids were visiting a daughter, Elle, who was a teenager, don't remember how old she was, and a son who was a bit younger than me. Elle was great. She was really nice, sweet, and really bored in our small town, so sometimes she'd take her brother and me to get ice cream or even play video games with us. I thought she was the greatest. Eventually, my mom asked her to babysit me and my own little brother, and yes, she was the best babysitter ever. She brought candy, movies, and we played board games. She even let me stay up late. The only thing was, the whole time she was peeking out the windows and she had shut the curtains as soon as she got there. We heard a few weird noises but tried to brush it off. I sort of noticed she seemed jumpy, but I was just a kid and not totally aware of what was happening until it got more and more obvious that there was someone outside. She asked me where the best hiding place was in the house, and I said under my brother's bed, so the three have squeezed under there in the dark while she called the police. Her dad came and found the neighborhood weirdo, an older teen, skulking around my house trying to spy on Elle. He had been stalking her all summer. She figured he was outside, but was trying to stay calm until she heard the back door knob jiggling. I don't know what happened to either of them. Before the next summer, her dad moved and I never saw her again. The weirdo was always weird, and he eventually moved too. Last I heard, he was in a major city and into drugs, but that was a few years ago. 2 years ago, right around Halloween, I was babysitting for these two ladies who each had a son. They wanted to go out, so I stayed at one of their houses and watched their boys. It was around 8 p.m., and the boys were sitting on the couch, playing on their iPads and whatnot, when somebody knocked on the door. I asked them if anyone was supposed to come over, and they both said no. I go over and check the eye hole in the door, and it's some guy in a gray hoodie, deliberately hunched over so I can't see his face. Immediately, I'm like, nope, 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 and don't say anything and start pacing around because I don't want to give him any inclination we're inside. A couple minutes later, I check outside the little window through the curtains, and he's gone. I didn't want to spook the kids anymore, and there weren't any more knocks, so I just kind of let it go as a prank. Cut to a few hours later, and the moms get back. They ask me how everything was, and I say the kids were great, but somebody had come to the door. They ask me what time, and I say around 8, and one of the moms start freaking out and going through her phone. The other one tells me that right around that time, somebody had been making strange phone calls to them on a blocked number. They had disguised their voice and were saying things like, "I can see you through your window." They didn't think it was serious because it didn't make sense in the context of where they were. But in retrospect, we're almost positive it was me he was looking at through the window. They escorted me to my car, and I touched base later, and apparently nothing strange ever happened after that. But I'm just really glad I didn't open that door because I have a feeling in my gut it would have been really bad.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.